The rain came down in sheets, turning the Hindu Kush mountainside into a slick, treacherous maze of rock and mud. Lieutenant Commander Rachel Raven Torres lay perfectly still in her hide position, her ghillie suit blending seamlessly with the scrub vegetation clinging to the ridgeline. Through her Schmidt and Bender scope, she could see everything unfolding in the valley 1,200 meters below. "Wind's picking up," Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb whispered beside her, his voice barely audible over the howling storm. As her spotter, Webb had worked with Rachel for 3 years, and their partnership had become the stuff of legend within SEAL Team 7. Gusting to 25, maybe 30 knots. Rachel made minute adjustments to her SR-25 rifle, her breathing slow and controlled despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Below, the rest of Alpha Platoon was executing the extraction of a high-value intelligence asset from a compound nestled in the valley. The operation had been running smoothly until 30 seconds ago, when their thermal imaging had picked up heat signatures moving in from the eastern ridge. "Tally 12 hostiles, eastern approach," Rachel reported into her radio, her voice calm and professional. "They're moving to cut off the extraction route." Commander James Holt's voice crackled back through her earpiece. "Can you interdict, Raven?" Rachel's jaw tightened. 18 months ago, Holt had been one of the loudest voices opposing her inclusion in SEAL Team 7. He'd questioned whether a woman could handle the physical demands, the mental pressure, the brotherhood. She'd proven him wrong on every count, but she could still hear the skepticism in some of their interactions. "Affirmative," she replied. "I have the shot." The enemy fighters were moving fast, using the storm as cover. They were well-trained, probably former Afghan army or hardened Taliban veterans. In less than 3 minutes, they'd have firing positions on her teammates in the valley. Rachel calculated wind speed, barometric pressure, the angle of descent, and the Coriolis effect in her head, variables that would make this series of shots nearly impossible in these conditions. "Range 1120 meters, Webb called out, reading the laser rangefinder. "Wind right to left, gusting. Temperature 42 degrees. Rachel's first target appeared in her scope, a fighter carrying an RPG, the weapon that posed the greatest threat to her team. She adjusted for the wind, led the target by a fraction, and exhaled slowly. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with a suppressed thump. Through the scope, she watched the fighter drop, the RPG clattering harmlessly against the rocks. She didn't pause to admire her work. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, acquiring the second target, another RPG operator, squeeze. The rifle spoke again, another hostile down. "Holy shit," Webb breathed. "You're threading needles in a hurricane." The remaining enemy fighters scattered, realizing they were being engaged by a sniper. But Rachel was already ahead of them, reading their movements, anticipating their reactions. A fighter dove behind a boulder. She put a round through the 6-inch gap between the rock and the ground, catching him as he tried to establish a firing position. Another attempted to flank left. She led him perfectly, and he crumpled mid-stride. Her breathing remained steady, her heartbeat slow and controlled. This was where she lived, in that space between one breath and the next, where time seemed to slow and every variable crystallized into perfect clarity. Gender didn't matter here. Politics didn't matter. Only the math, the wind, and the shot. "5 down," Webb reported, all creeping into his professional demeanor. "They're breaking contact." But Rachel saw what Webb couldn't yet see through his spotting scope. 3 fighters were circling south, trying to reach a position where they could fire down into the extraction point. They were moving through dead ground, thinking they were safe from her angle. "Negative," Rachel said. 3 more southern route. They're going for the high ground." She shifted her position slightly, ignoring the rain streaming down her face, the cold seeping into her bones. The first of the 3 fighters emerged from cover, sprinting for a rock outcropping. Rachel compensated for his speed, the increasing wind, and the fact that he was now moving uphill at an angle. She fired. The fighter went down. The remaining 2 froze, then made a fatal mistake. They tried to retreat back the way they'd come. Rachel took them both in rapid succession, her shots so precise that Webb could only shake his head in disbelief. "Targets neutralized," Rachel reported. "Extraction route is clear." In the valley below, Alpha Platoon was already moving, their principal asset secured and heading toward the extraction point. Holt's voice came over the radio, and this time there was something different in his tone, respect, hard-earned and genuine. "Outstanding work, Raven. 7 hostiles eliminated in under 90 seconds. You just saved this mission." Rachel allowed herself a small smile as she began breaking down her position, carefully packing her rifle. "Just doing my job, sir." As she and Webb began their careful descent from the hide position, the chief glanced at her with a grin. "You know they're going to be talking about this one back at the compound, right? 7 for 7, in conditions that would make most snipers pack it in." "Let them talk," Rachel replied, her mind already moving forward. She'd heard the pre-mission briefing rumors, whispers about a bigger operation in the works, something that would require the best shooters in naval special warfare. If they wanted the best, she'd make damn sure they knew where to find her. What she didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that in a nondescript building in Virginia Beach, intelligence analysts were piecing together fragments of communications that would lead to the most dangerous mission of her career. A mission that would take her into the heart of a storm far more deadly than the one now raging around her. A mission that would test everything she was, and nearly cost her everything she had. The fluorescent lights of the SCIF, Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility, at Naval Special Warfare Command hummed overhead as Rachel took her seat in the briefing room. 5 days had passed since the Hindu Kush operation, and she'd barely had time to file her after-action report before being summoned back to Virginia Beach. Around the rectangular table sat the other members of Alpha Platoon, their faces reflecting the same curiosity she felt. Commander James Holt entered last, followed by a woman Rachel didn't recognize, mid-40s, civilian clothes, but with the unmistakable bearing of intelligence community brass. A Navy captain she'd never seen before closed the door behind them, and the electronic lock engaged with a heavy click. "Gentlemen," Holt began, then nodded toward Rachel and Lieutenant Commander Torres. "What you're about to hear doesn't leave this room. Captain Reeves, if you would." The Navy captain stepped forward, and a photograph appeared on the large screen at the front of the room. It showed a blurry figure in traditional Afghan dress, face obscured, walking through what appeared to be a marketplace. "For 8 years, Captain Reeves began, we've been hunting a ghost. The intelligence community knows him only as the Architect. He's been linked to 17 major terrorist attacks across 3 continents, including the embassy bombing in Nairobi 3 years ago that killed 42 people, including 8 Americans." Rachel leaned forward, studying the photograph. Even in the grainy image, there was something about the man's posture, the way he moved, calculated, aware, dangerous. "The Architect has evaded every attempt at capture or elimination," the civilian woman interjected, her voice crisp and analytical. "I'm Deputy Director Sarah Chen, CIA Counterterrorism. This individual has survived 2 drone strikes, 3 direct action raids, and more surveillance operations than I can count. He's smart, well-funded, and has a network that spans from Afghanistan to Syria to cells operating in Western Europe." Webb raised his hand slightly. "Ma'am, if I may, what's changed? Why are we looking at him now?" Chen's expression hardened. 10 days ago, we intercepted communications suggesting the Architect is planning something big. Multiple simultaneous attacks on U.S. soil. Shopping malls, schools, subway systems in at least 5 major cities. The chatter indicates the timeline is within the next 60 days. A heavy silence settled over the room. Rachel felt her stomach tighten. This wasn't just another HVT elimination. This was prevention of a catastrophic domestic attack. "We finally caught a break," Captain Reeves continued, advancing to the next slide, a satellite image of a remote compound nestled in a narrow valley. NSA intercepted a satellite phone call that we've authenticated as the architect's voice. The call was routed through 17 different relays, but our analysts traced it to this location, the Wakhan Corridor, extreme northeastern Afghanistan. Rachel studied the imagery. The compound was isolated, surrounded by mountains on 3 sides, accessible only by a single road that wound through treacherous terrain. The Wakhan Corridor, Holt said, standing and pointing to the map, is one of the most remote regions on Earth. It's where Afghanistan touches China, Pakistan, and Tajikistan. The terrain is brutal, the weather is worse, and there's virtually no U.S. military presence within 200 miles. Sir, Rachel spoke up, her tactical mind already analyzing the problem. What's the weather window looking like? Reeves nodded approvingly at the question. That's the complication, Lieutenant Commander. Monsoon season is starting early this year. We have a 72-hour window, starting in 5 days, before the region becomes completely inaccessible for at least 6 weeks. And we can't wait 6 weeks, Chen added grimly. If the architect is planning domestic attacks in the next 60 days, we need to eliminate him now and recover whatever intelligence is in that compound. Computers, phones, documents, anything that tells us about his network and operational plans. Holt stepped forward, his expression serious. Alpha Platoon, you're being tasked with Operation Phantom Thunder. Insertion will be halo jump from 30,000 feet, 72 hours on the ground, and extraction via helo from a landing zone 15 clicks from the target. The mission profile is straightforward. Infiltrate, eliminate the architect, secure all intelligence materials, and extract. Rachel felt Webb glance at her from across the table, and she knew what he was thinking. Straightforward on paper, maybe. In reality, this would be one of the most dangerous operations SEAL Team 7 had ever undertaken. Rules of engagement, asked Lieutenant Jake Morrison, Alpha Platoon's assault team leader. The architect is kill on sight, Reeves replied. Anyone actively defending the compound is hostile. However, intelligence suggests there may be civilians in the area, local villagers, possibly forced labor. Positive identification is required before engaging any target that isn't clearly armed and threatening. Chen pulled up another image, a detailed layout of the compound based on satellite reconnaissance. The target building is a fortified structure, likely reinforced concrete. We estimate between 15 and 30 enemy combatants on site, possibly more. They're well-armed and well-trained. The architect doesn't employ amateurs. Holt looked directly at Rachel. Lieutenant Commander Torres, I'm designating you as primary sniper for this operation. We need your skills on Overwatch. The compound has multiple defensive positions, and will need surgical precision to protect the assault element. Rachel met his eyes steadily. Understood, sir. I'll need detailed elevation maps, structural analysis of the compound, and real-time weather updates up until insertion. You'll have everything we can provide, Reeves assured her. But I won't sugarcoat this. The weather is going to be a major factor. The monsoon is pushing in faster than predicted. You'll be operating in heavy rain, high winds, reduced visibility. It's going to test every skill you have. We've trained for worse, Webb said confidently, though Rachel could hear the edge in his voice. They both knew this wasn't bravado, this was the reality of their profession. Holt stood straighter. You have 5 days to prepare. Study the terrain, rehearse the operation, check and recheck your equipment. Intelligence will provide updated satellite imagery every 12 hours, weather reports every 6. This is a zero-fail mission, people. The architect has eluded us for 8 years and has American blood on his hands. We end this, and we prevent whatever hell he's planning to unleash on our homeland. Captain Reeves added, one more thing. The architect knows we're hunting him. He survived this long because he's paranoid and careful. The moment he suspects compromise, he'll vanish into the mountains and we'll lose our only chance to stop these attacks. Operational security is paramount. Outside this room, this mission doesn't exist. As the briefing concluded and the team began filing out, Holt caught Rachel's arm. His expression was unreadable. "I specifically requested you for this operation, Tours," he said quietly. "What you did in the Hindu Kush, that's the level of skill we need. Maybe the only level that gives us a chance." Rachel nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. "I won't let you down, sir." "I know you won't," Holt replied, and this time there was no skepticism in his voice, only trust. "Now go get ready. 5 days isn't much time to prepare for the impossible." C-130's engines roared as it climbed through 30,000 feet, the aircraft bucking and shuddering against the turbulence. Rachel sat in the cargo bay, her oxygen mask secured, her main and reserve parachutes checked and rechecked. Around her, the 13 other members of Alpha Platoon sat in similar silence, each man lost in his own pre-jump ritual. Through the small window, Rachel could see darkness broken only by occasional flashes of lightning. The meteorological report had been grim. The monsoon was arriving 12 hours ahead of schedule, and conditions on the ground were deteriorating rapidly. Command had given them a choice: scrub the mission and wait 6 weeks, or jump now and complete the operation before the weather made extraction impossible. It hadn't been a difficult decision. 60 days until domestic attacks meant they couldn't afford to wait. 10 minutes, the loadmaster called out, his voice crackling through their headsets. Rachel stood and moved through her final equipment check with Webb. Her SR-25 rifle was broken down and secured in a protective case strapped to her leg. Her plate carrier held extra magazines, medical supplies, and a backup sidearm. Every piece of gear had been weight-optimized. They'd be moving fast through hostile terrain, and every ounce mattered. "You good, Raven?" Webb asked, checking her oxygen flow and parachute connections. "Good to go, Chief," she replied, returning the favor and inspecting his gear with the same meticulous attention. Commander Holt stood at the front of the chalk, his eyes scanning his team one final time. Despite the oxygen mask, Rachel could read his expression, determination mixed with the weight of command. He was sending his people into hell, and they all knew some might not come back. 5 minutes, the loadmaster announced. The rear ramp began to lower, and the temperature in the cargo bay plummeted. Wind screamed into the aircraft, and Rachel could see the storm below, a churning mass of clouds lit from within by lightning. They'd be jumping directly into it. 1 minute standby. The team formed up at the ramp, Rachel positioned in the middle of the stack. Her heart rate was steady at 62 beats per minute, the same as always before a jump. Fear was natural, but she'd learned years ago to channel it into focus. Green light, go, go, go. One by one, the SEALs stepped off the ramp and disappeared into the darkness. When Rachel's turn came, she didn't hesitate. She stepped into the void and gravity seized her. The freefall was violent. Wind tore at her body as she plummeted through the storm, rain pelting her goggles, lightning illuminating the clouds around her in strobing flashes. She held her body position, tracking toward the designated release point, watching her altimeter tick down through 20,000 feet, 15,000, 10,000. At 8,000 feet, she pulled her ripcord. The parachute deployed with a sharp jolt, and suddenly the chaos of freefall gave way to the eerie quiet of canopy flight. Around her, she could see the other chutes deploying, dark shapes against darker clouds. Alpha 1, comm check. Holt's voice came through her earpiece. One by one, the team reported in. Everyone had made it through the jump. Now came the hard part, navigating to the landing zone in zero visibility conditions. Rachel steered her chute using her GPS and night vision, fighting wind gusts that threatened to push her off course. The ground rushed up faster than expected, and she hit hard, rolling to absorb the impact in muddy terrain. Within seconds, she'd collapsed her chute and had her weapon assembled and ready. Alpha 7 on the ground, she reported, using her call sign. The team consolidated at the rally point, a cluster of rocks 2 clicks from the compound. Holt did a quick headcount and equipment check. Miraculously, everyone had landed within 500 meters of the intended drop zone. "Solid work, people," Holt said quietly. "We move in 10. Check your gear, hydrate, and get ready to move." The rain was relentless, turning the ground into a slippery morass. Rachel pulled out her tablet and reviewed the route one more time, 12 kilometers of mountain terrain, to be covered in darkness, arriving at the target just before dawn. They moved out in a tactical column, night vision goggles painting the world in shades of green. The terrain was even worse than the satellite imagery had suggested: steep ravines, loose scree, and vegetation that grabbed at their equipment. Progress was slow and exhausting. 6 hours into the movement, they reached their first waypoint, a ridgeline overlooking a valley they'd need to cross. Below, a river that had been a stream in the satellite photos was now a raging torrent, swollen by the storm. "We need to cross that," Morrison asked, staring at the churning water. "Only way to the target," Holt confirmed. "There's a narrow point about 500 meters south. We rope across." They moved to the crossing point, where the river narrowed to about 15 meters but ran fast and deep. Webb and 2 other SEALs rigged a rope system, anchoring it to rocks on both sides. The plan was simple: cross one at a time, secured to the rope, while the team provided security. Rachel was 5th in line. She watched Morrison cross first, fighting the current but making it safely. Then Webb, then 2 more operators. When her turn came, she clipped into the rope and stepped into the water. The current hit her like a truck. Even secured to the rope, the force of the water was staggering, threatening to sweep her downstream. She fought forward, hand over hand, her boots barely finding purchase on the slippery rocks below. She was 3/4 across when she heard the sharp crack. "RPG," someone shouted. The world exploded in light and sound. The rocket-propelled grenade hit the rocks behind her, and the blast waved through her sideways. Her clip detached from the rope, and suddenly the current had her. Rachel tumbled underwater, disoriented, fighting to surface. When her head broke water, she gasped for air and saw muzzle flashes on both banks, her team engaging an enemy force that had ambushed them at the crossing point. "Ravens in the water," she heard Webb scream. She tried to swim toward the bank, but the current was too strong, pulling her downstream into a section of rapids. Rocks battered her body as the river accelerated, carrying her away from her team, away from the mission, away from everything. She caught a glimpse of Webb at the river's edge, reaching out helplessly as she was swept past. Then another rapid pulled her under, and the world became a chaotic tumble of water and darkness. Her head struck something hard, a rock, a submerged log, she couldn't tell. Stars exploded across her vision. She tried to swim to fight, but her body wasn't responding correctly. The cold was seeping into her bones, sapping her strength. The last thing she heard before darkness took her was Holt's voice on the radio, distant and desperate. "Alpha 7, respond. Raven, do you copy?" Then there was only the roar of the river and the embrace of unconsciousness. Somewhere upstream on the muddy bank, Webb found Rachel's rifle scope wedged between 2 rocks, the lens cracked, the mounting system torn away. He stared at it for a long moment, rain streaming down his face, before keying his radio. "Commander," his voice was thick with emotion, "I've got part of Raven's weapon. There's blood on it, sir." Holt's response came after a long pause, the weight of command forcing him to speak words no leader wants to say. "Mark the position. We'll search for 2 more hours, but we can't compromise the mission. The architect is our priority." And in the darkness, as the team swept the riverbank with infrared lasers, finding nothing but wreckage and empty water, the whisper spread among them. a whisper that would soon become a certainty. "She's gone." Pain dragged Rachel back to consciousness. Her eyes opened to gray dawn light filtering through storm clouds, rain still falling but lighter now, almost gentle. She was lying on rocks, water lapping at her boots. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was or why every inch of her body screamed in agony. Then it came flooding back, the ambush, the explosion, the river. Rachel tried to push herself up and nearly blacked out again. Her left arm hung at an unnatural angle, and when she tried to move it, white-hot agony lanced through her shoulder. Broken. Definitely broken. She did a mental inventory of the rest of her body, bruised ribs, possibly cracked, gash on her forehead, still bleeding, dozens of cuts and contusions from being battered against rocks. But she was alive. She forced herself to sit up, using only her right arm, and assessed her situation. The river had carried her at least 3 miles downstream, maybe more. She was on a rocky bank in a narrow gorge, surrounded by steep cliffs. Her radio was gone, torn away by the current. Her primary weapon gone. Most of her equipment gone. What remained? Her Sig Sauer P226 pistol, somehow still secured in her holster. A Ka-Bar knife on her belt. A small survival kit in a waterproof pouch on her vest. 2 protein bars, miraculously intact. And her compass, the old brass one her grandfather had given her when she graduated Bud S. Rachel pulled out the survival kit with trembling hands. Inside, water purification tablets, an emergency blanket, fire-starting materials, fishing line, a small first aid kit, and paracord. It wasn't much, but she'd been trained to survive with less. First priority, stabilize her arm. She cut a section from her pant leg and fashioned it into a sling, then used paracord and a straight piece of driftwood to splint the break. The pain made her vision swim, but she worked through it, focusing on the task rather than the agony. When she was done, her arm was immobilized. Not perfect, but it would have to do. Second priority, stop the bleeding from her head wound. She used the first aid kit's gauze and medical tape, pressing firmly until the flow slowed to a trickle. Third priority, figure out where the hell she was and what to do next. Rachel pulled out her compass and studied the terrain. The river had carried her south and east, away from her team and away from the target compound. By her estimate, she was now at least 5 miles off course, separated from Alpha Platoon by impassable terrain and unknown numbers of enemy forces. The smart play would be to find a hide position and wait for extraction. Except extraction wasn't coming for 72 hours, and she had no radio to call it in. Her team thought she was dead. She'd heard Webb's voice as the river swept her away, the desperation in it. She could try to evade, move to an extraction point, and hope the team came looking. But that would take days of movement through hostile territory with a broken arm and minimal supplies. Or Rachel looked northwest, toward where the target compound should be. Her team was continuing the mission. They had to. The architect was still the priority, domestic attacks still pending. Holt would push forward because that's what the mission required. A crazy idea formed in her mind. According to the briefing, the compound was nestled in a valley with high ground on 3 sides. Her team would approach from the north, the most accessible route. But what if there was another approach? What if the river had actually carried her to a position where she could reach the southern ridge? The one the satellite imagery had shown as nearly vertical, too dangerous to climb, but offering a superior sniper position. It was insane. She was injured, under-equipped, alone in enemy territory. Every rational part of her mind screamed to find cover and survive. But Rachel had never been one to take the rational path when the mission demanded more. She stood slowly, testing her balance. Dizzy but functional. She checked her pistol, somehow still loaded though the magazine was down to 11 rounds. 11 rounds, a knife and determination. "Hooya," she whispered to herself, the SEAL battle cry sounding defiant even in her weakened voice. Rachel began moving northwest, paralleling the river, using the terrain for cover. Every step was agony. Her ribs protested, her arm throbbed, and exhaustion pulled at her like physical weight. But she'd endured worse in Bud S. Hell Week, had pushed through pain that would break most people. She moved through the day, taking breaks only when absolutely necessary, rationing her water and the 2 protein bars. The terrain was brutal, forcing her to climb over fallen trees and navigate around rock fields with one functional arm. As the sun began to set on the first day, Rachel heard voices ahead. She froze, then carefully moved to a position where she could observe without being seen. Below, in a small clearing, were 4 fighters, local militia by their appearance, armed with AK-47s. They were cooking over a small fire, laughing and talking in Pashto. Rachel understood enough of the language to catch fragments of their conversation. They were talking about the American soldiers and an ambush at the river crossing. One of them gestured proudly, describing how his RPG had scattered the Americans. Her jaw tightened. These were the men who'd ambushed her team. She had 11 bullets and could probably take all 4 before they could react. But gunfire would alert every hostile in the area, and she needed to stay invisible. She circled wide around their position, adding an hour to her movement but avoiding contact. As darkness fell, she found a small cave formed by overhanging rocks, barely large enough for her to squeeze into, but dry and concealed. Rachel forced herself to eat half a protein bar and drink some water. Then she pulled out the emergency blanket and wrapped it around herself, trying to retain what little body heat she had left. Sleep was dangerous. Hypothermia was a real risk, but she needed rest. She dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound, hand on her pistol. Day 2 began with rain again. Rachel emerged from the cave stiff and shivering, her injured arm having swollen during the night. She changed the bandage on her head wound, nodding with relief that it had mostly stopped bleeding. The terrain became steeper as she climbed higher into the mountains. Her GPS was gone, but she navigated by compass and the position of the sun during brief breaks in the clouds. She was moving parallel to what she estimated was the route her team would take, staying high and out of sight. In the early afternoon, she heard gunfire in the distance, automatic weapons, possibly her team engaging enemy forces. She wanted desperately to move toward the sound to help, but she was too far away and too injured to make a difference. By late afternoon on day 2, Rachel was near collapse. Her water was almost gone, and she hadn't eaten since the previous night. When she spotted a stream, she risked exposure to refill her water bottle and treat it with purification tablets. As she knelt by the stream, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold, a child's scream. Rachel's head snapped up. About 200 meters away, 3 militia fighters were dragging a young girl, no more than 10 years old, from a small hut. The girl was fighting, screaming for help in Pashto. Behind her, an elderly man lay motionless in the doorway. Every tactical instinct Rachel had screamed at her to stay hidden. Engaging would compromise her position, burn through her limited ammunition, potentially get her killed. But she saw her own niece in that girl's face, heard her sister's daughter in those screams. Rachel drew her pistol and started moving. Rachel moved swiftly down the hillside, using trees and rocks for cover, her pistol raised in her good hand. The 3 militia fighters were focused on the struggling girl, dragging her toward a battered pickup truck parked near the hut. They hadn't seen Rachel yet. She had to be smart about this. 3 targets, 11 rounds, 1 functioning arm, and no backup. The SEAL training scenarios from years ago flickered through her mind: economy of force, tactical surprise, violence of action. Rachel positioned herself behind a large boulder 30 meters from the truck. She steadied her pistol against the rock, compensating for her broken left arm by using the stone as a brace. Deep breath. Exhale slowly. The closest fighter was holding the girl, using her as a shield while his companions opened the truck's door. Not ideal, but Rachel had no choice. "Hey," she shouted in Pashto, her accent rough but understandable. All three fighters spun toward her voice. The one holding the girl instinctively pulled her closer, exactly what Rachel expected. His two companions raised their rifles, and that was their fatal mistake. Rachel fired twice in rapid succession. Both shooters dropped before they could get rounds off. The third fighter, still holding the girl, fumbled for the pistol in his belt. Rachel's third shot hit him in the shoulder, deliberately non-lethal. He released the girl and stumbled backward, and Rachel's fourth shot ended the threat. Silence fell over the clearing, broken only by the girl's sobbing. Rachel emerged from cover, keeping her pistol ready, scanning for additional threats. The elderly man in the doorway groaned, alive then. She moved to the girl first, kneeling despite the pain shooting through her ribs. "You're safe now," Rachel said softly in Pashto. "I won't hurt you." The girl stared at her with wide, terrified eyes, taking in Rachel's torn uniform, the makeshift splint, the blood. Then the child lunged forward and wrapped her arms around Rachel, sobbing into her vest. Rachel held her with her good arm, making soothing sounds while keeping her weapon ready. After a moment, she gently separated from the girl and moved to check on the elderly man. He had a nasty gash on his head but was conscious. "Grandfather," the girl cried, rushing to his side. The old man's eyes focused on Rachel, taking in her uniform, her insignia. Recognition and fear crossed his face. American soldier in his village, having just killed 3 men. "I mean you no harm," Rachel said, holstering her pistol. "They were hurting your granddaughter." The old man studied her for a long moment, then spoke in surprisingly clear English. "You are injured, badly." "I've had worse," Rachel lied. "You are the one they are looking for," he continued. "The woman soldier, they say you drowned in the river." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "Who says this?" "Everyone. The foreign fighters who came 2 days ago, they speak of Americans in the mountains. They say they killed one at the river, a woman. They celebrate this." So Alpha Platoon was still operational, still moving toward the objective. And the enemy thought Rachel was dead. Both useful pieces of intelligence. "The foreign fighters," Rachel pressed, "where is their compound?" The old man looked at his granddaughter, then back at Rachel. "You saved Parisa. For this, I am in your debt. But if I help you, they will kill everyone in this village." "They'll kill you anyway," Rachel said quietly. "Men who take children don't leave witnesses. I can stop them, but I need your help." The old man was silent for a long moment, weighing the life of his granddaughter against the risk to his community. Finally, he nodded. "Come inside. I will tend your wounds and we will talk." 4 hours later, Rachel had a full stomach for the first time in 3 days, a properly splinted arm, fresh bandages, and intelligence that changed everything. The old man, whose name was Ahmadi, had been a schoolteacher before the wars. His village sat in the shadow of the architect's compound, and for years they'd lived under the terrorists' oppressive presence. Ahmadi had watched foreign fighters come and go, had seen weapons and supplies moved in and out, and most importantly, he'd observed the compound's defenses. "The northern approach where your soldiers come from is heavily fortified," Ahmadi explained, drawing a map in the dirt floor. 30, maybe 40 fighters. Machine gun positions here, here, and here. They expect attack from this direction. Rachel studied the crude map. "What about the southern side?" "Cliffs, very steep. They have only 2 guards there because they believe no one can climb it." Ahmadi looked at Rachel's splinted arm. "No one could, especially not injured." "Show me," Rachel said. Ahmadi led her outside as dusk fell. In the distance, she could see the compound, a fortified structure built into the mountainside, just as the satellite imagery had shown. But from this angle, she could see something the overhead shots had missed, a ridgeline to the south that rose higher than the compound, offering a direct line of sight into its inner courtyard. The ridgeline Amadi had said was impossible to climb. Rachel studied it through the broken scope she'd recovered from her vest, the only piece of her rifle that had survived. The cliff face was nearly vertical, maybe 300 feet of exposed rock. With 2 good arms, proper climbing gear and support, it would be challenging but doable. With a broken arm, makeshift equipment, and alone, it should be impossible. There, Rachel said, pointing. That's where I need to be. Amadi stared at her like she was insane. You cannot. I can, Rachel interrupted. And I will, because my team is going to assault that compound, probably tomorrow, and they're walking into a killing field. I need to be in position to provide overwatch. You have no rifle, Amadi pointed out. Rachel smiled grimly. Then I'll have to get one. At that moment, 12 kilometers to the north, Commander Holt and what remained of Alpha Platoon were establishing their final surveillance position. Webb lay beside him, glassing the compound through a spotting scope, his face haggard from 3 days of combat movement. 27 enemy personnel visible, Webb reported quietly. Defensive positions at every approach. This is going to be a bloodbath, sir. Holt's jaw tightened. They'd already lost Rachel. How many more of his people would die taking this compound? But the intelligence they'd intercepted during movement, encrypted communications about the domestic attacks, made it clear they couldn't abort. The architect was here, and the attack was imminent. We go at dawn, Holt decided. Full frontal assault, maximum aggression. It's the only. Sir, one of the operators interrupted, pointing at his scope. Movement on the southern ridge. Single person climbing. Holt swung his optic toward the southern cliff face. At first, he saw nothing. Then, in the fading light, he caught a glimpse of a figure scaling the nearly vertical rock face. The climber moved slowly, methodically, using what appeared to be improvised gear. That's insane, Webb breathed. Nobody could make that climb, especially not in this weather, and he stopped abruptly, his hand tightening on the scope. Sir, look at the movement pattern, the way they're compensating for their left side. Holt looked closer and his breath caught. The climber was favoring their right arm, the left hanging close to their body, barely being used. It can't be, Holt whispered. Webb's voice was thick with emotion when he spoke. Sir, I've been spotting for Raven for 3 years. I know how she moves. That's her, sir. That's Raven. On the southern ridge, Rachel Torres pulled herself onto a narrow ledge halfway up the cliff face, her broken arm screaming in protest, her entire body trembling with exhaustion. She looked up at the remaining 150 feet of vertical rock, then toward the compound where her team was preparing to assault. She'd made it this far on pure determination. Now she just had to make it the rest of the way. Behind her, Amadi's gift hung from her improvised harness, an old SVD Dragunov sniper rifle, Soviet-era but well-maintained. Not her SR-25, but it would have to do. Rachel reached for the next handhold and kept climbing. Rachel's fingers found another crack in the rock face, and she pulled herself up another foot. Pain radiated from her broken arm despite the splint, but she'd learned to compartmentalize it, to push it into a distant corner of her mind where it couldn't stop her. The climb had taken 4 hours. 4 hours of agony, of near falls, of moments where her right hand was the only thing between her and a fatal plunge. She'd used every piece of paracord from her survival kit, supplemented by rope Amadi had provided, creating a makeshift harness system that would have made any climbing instructor weep. But it had worked. Somehow, impossibly, it had worked. Rachel hauled herself over the final lip of rock onto the ridgeline and collapsed, gasping. Her entire body shook with exhaustion. Blood seeped through the bandage on her head wound, and her broken arm had swollen to twice its normal size. But she was here. She allowed herself 30 seconds of rest, then forced herself to move. Dawn was perhaps 2 hours away, and she needed to be in position. The ridgeline offered exactly what she'd hoped for, a clear line of sight directly into the compound's inner courtyard, a view no one had anticipated because no one believed this position could be reached. Rachel found a cluster of rocks that provided both cover and a stable shooting platform. She carefully unwrapped the SVD Dragunov that Ahmadi had given her. The rifle was old, probably from the Soviet occupation in the 1980s, but it had been meticulously maintained. Ahmadi had explained that it belonged to his son, a resistance fighter killed by the Taliban years ago. He'd kept it hidden ever since. "My son would want it used to protect the innocent," Ahmadi had said, pressing the weapon into her hands. Rachel inspected the rifle with her one good hand. The scope was intact, the action smooth. She had 20 rounds, a single magazine, 20 rounds to make a difference. She worked quickly, using rocks and paracord to create a stabilization system. Her broken left arm couldn't support the rifle's weight, so she built a rest that would hold it steady while she operated the bolt and trigger with her right hand. It was crude, improvised, and would never work under normal circumstances. But nothing about this situation was normal. Rachel settled into position and looked through the scope. The compound materialized in the pre-dawn darkness, illuminated by scattered lights. She could see guards on patrol, defensive positions, and the main building where the architect presumably slept. She keyed her radio. The small emergency backup unit Ahmadi had somehow procured from his village, and broadcast on Alpha Platoon's frequency. "Alpha 1, this is Alpha 7, how copy?" "Static then, say again, Alpha 7. Webb's voice, shocked and disbelieving. "Alpha 7 is in position," Rachel transmitted calmly. "Southern ridge, elevation advantage, direct line of sight to target compound. Raven is alive and ready to provide overwatch." The radio erupted with Webb's shouting. "She's alive, sir, she's alive. Raven, where the hell?" "Focus, Chief," Rachel interrupted, though she couldn't help but smile. "I'm in a sniper position with limited ammunition and compromised physical capability. I can provide precision fire support, but I need continuous meteorological data and target designation." Holt's voice came through, controlled but with an undercurrent of emotion. "Raven, your position is impossible. We saw you climb. How did you never mind? Can you maintain that position?" "Affirmative, sir. I have 20 rounds, stable platform, and a Russian rifle that's older than I am. It'll have to be enough." A pause, then, "Outstanding work getting into position, Lieutenant Commander. Here's the situation. We assault at dawn, approximately 90 minutes from now. Intelligence indicates the architect is in the main building, second floor, east wing. Multiple hostiles, heavily armed. We need you to eliminate the machine gun positions on the northern wall before we breach." Rachel studied the compound through her scope, identifying the positions Holt described. 3 machine gun nests, each capable of cutting down the assault team. Shots of approximately 1,400 meters, slightly downhill, complicated by increasing wind as the storm system continued to build. "I can make those shots," Rachel confirmed, though privately she wondered if that was true. 3 precision shots with a broken arm and an unfamiliar weapon, but her team needed her to be confident, needed to believe she could do the impossible. Because they were about to risk their lives on that belief. "Webb," Rachel continued, "I need wind speed, temperature, and barometric pressure, also humidity if you've got it." "On it," Webb replied, his voice all business now. She could hear him working his instruments. "Wind 9 knots from the northwest, gusting to 15. Temperature 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Barometric pressure dropping, 29.1 and falling. Storms coming in hard, Raven. Visibility is going to degrade fast." Rachel calculated the ballistics in her head, accounting for the unfamiliar rifle and the environmental factors. The SVD shot a 7.62 x 54R round, similar to but not identical to what she was used to. She'd need to adjust for the difference. "Give me a test target," she requested. "Something I can shoot without compromising the mission." "Stand by," Holt responded. After a moment, "See the vehicle on the southeast corner, the technical with the mounted gun." Rachel found it, a pickup truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed. "I see it." "The truck is hostile. If you can disable it, we'll have one less problem during exfiltration." Rachel settled into her shooting position, her broken arm secured in the improvised rest system. The pain was constant now, a dull roar that threatened to overwhelm her focus. She pushed it away, entering that space where only the shot mattered. The crosshairs settled on the Technical's engine block. She controlled her breathing, calculated wind and distance, then squeezed the trigger. The SVD bucked against her shoulder. Through the scope, she saw the Technical's hood explode upward, steam erupting from the destroyed engine. "Hit," Webb confirmed, awe in his voice. "Dead center on the engine block at 1,400 meters with an injury and a rifle you've never fired. Raven, you're unreal." "Save the compliments for after," Rachel replied, already calculating adjustments. The rifle shot slightly left and low compared to her SR-25. She'd compensate. The sky was beginning to lighten, the sun still below the horizon but painting the clouds with faint gray light. In the compound, she could see increased activity, guards changing shifts, morning routines beginning. "All elements stand by," Holt transmitted. "We execute in 15 minutes. Raven, on my mark, you'll engage machine gun positions Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie in sequence. Speed is critical. Once you start shooting, they'll know we're here." Rachel identified each target. Alpha position, 2 men behind a heavy machine gun northern wall. Bravo position, 3 men same wall 50 meters east. Charlie position, 2 men northeast corner tower. 7 targets, 15 minutes until the shooting started, and 20 rounds in her magazine. The wind began to pick up, howling across the ridgeline. Rachel pulled her tattered uniform tighter against the cold, but her hands remained steady on the rifle. 4 days ago, she'd been swept away by a river, declared dead, left for lost. Now she was about to prove that sometimes ghosts come back. And when they do, they bring hell with them. The 15 minutes crawled by like hours. Rachel lay perfectly still, controlling her breathing, ignoring the pain that had become her constant companion. Through her scope, she watched the compound come fully alive as dawn broke, guards walking their posts, fighters emerging from buildings, morning routines that would soon be shattered by violence. 5 minutes, Holt transmitted. "All elements acknowledge." One by one, the assault teams checked in. Rachel was last. Alpha 7 ready. The wind had increased to a steady 20 knots, gusting higher. Rain began to fall again, light at first but building rapidly. Rachel watched the flags on the compound's walls, reading the wind's patterns, calculating how it would affect her shots. 3 minutes. "Raven, you're cleared hot on my mark. Engage machine gun positions in sequence Alpha through Charlie." Rachel found her first target, the machine gun team at position Alpha. 2 men, one behind the gun, one feeding ammunition. They were laughing about something, oblivious to the death that waited 1,400 meters away. 2 minutes. Rachel's world narrowed to the scope picture. Wind right to left at 20 knots. Downhill angle approximately 15 degrees. SVD shooting characteristics compensated for. Range 1,412 meters. The math was complex, but her mind processed it automatically after thousands of hours of training. 1 minute. All teams moved to assault positions. Through the scope, Rachel saw her team emerging from cover far below, moving like shadows toward the compound's northern wall. If she failed to eliminate these machine gun positions, her teammates would be slaughtered before they reached the walls. Failure was not an option. 30 seconds. Raven, stand by. Rachel settled the crosshairs on the machine gunner's chest. Steady breathing. Slow heartbeat. The world reduced to this moment, this shot, this impossible distance in impossible conditions with an impossible rifle. Execute, execute, execute. Rachel squeezed the trigger. The SVD roared. Through the scope, she saw the machine gunner drop. She didn't pause to confirm the kill. Her right hand was already working the bolt, chambering a new round. The second man at position Alpha was turning, reaching for the gun. Rachel fired again. He fell. Alpha position neutralized, Webb called. Position Bravo, 3 men already alerted by the shots scrambling to man their weapon. Rachel shifted aim, compensated for the increased wind, fired. The first shooter dropped. Bolt action. Fire. The second fell. The third man was smarter. He dove for cover behind sandbags. Bravo position. 1 hostile remaining in cover, Rachel reported, already tracking to position Charlie. The northeast tower, 2 men, now aware they were under fire, searching frantically for the shooter's position. They'd never think to look at the impossible southern ridge. Rachel's first shot hit the one behind the gun. Her second caught his partner as he tried to drag the body away. Charlie neutralized, Webb confirmed. 3 seconds between shots. Raven, you just saved this mission. 1 hostile still at Bravo position, Rachel reminded them, searching for the man who'd taken cover. There, a flash of movement behind the sandbags. But before she could take the shot, the compound erupted with activity. Alpha platoon had reached the walls, and explosives bloomed against the gates. The assault had begun. All elements were breaching, Holt shouted over the radio. Rachel shifted to Overwatch mode, scanning for threats to her team. A fighter appeared on a rooftop, RPG on his shoulder, aiming at the breaching team. Rachel fired. The fighter toppled backward, the RPG clattering harmlessly on the roof. 2 more fighters rushed to a second-floor window overlooking the courtyard where Morrison's team was entering. Rachel took them both with consecutive shots, working the bolt so fast that Webb couldn't keep up with his counting. Multiple hostiles, western building, Morrison called out. Rachel saw them, 4 fighters taking positions to ambush the assault team. She engaged rapidly, dropping 3 before the 4th realized the shots were coming from above and behind. He turned toward her position, raising his rifle, but Rachel's bullet found him first. The battle raged for 7 minutes that felt like hours. Rachel fired methodically, prioritizing targets that threatened her team, watching her ammunition count drop with each shot. 15 rounds, 12, 9. Then through the chaos she saw him. A figure emerged from the main building's 2nd floor onto a protected balcony, a man in expensive Western clothing, moving with authority, barking orders at the fighters around him. Even from 1,400 meters, Rachel could see the satellite phone in his hand. "I have eyes on a high-value individual," Rachel transmitted. 2nd floor balcony, main building, matches physical description of primary target. "Can you confirm identity?" Holt asked, his team still fighting through the compound's ground floor. Rachel studied the man through her scope. He was older, graying beard, scarred face. He moved like someone accustomed to command, someone who'd spent years evading death. The architect, it had to be. "Physical characteristics match," Rachel reported, "but I need positive ID before engaging." The man turned and Rachel saw his face in profile. She'd memorized every photograph in the intelligence briefing, every angle, every distinguishing feature. "Positive ID confirmed. I have the architect in my scope." "Take the shot," Holt ordered immediately. "I say again, you are cleared to engage primary target." But as Rachel settled her crosshairs on the architect's chest, the wind gusted violently. The flags on the compound walls snapped horizontal. Rain began to pour in sheets, reducing visibility dramatically. Through her scope, the architect became a wavering image, obscured by the storm. This was the shot she'd climbed an impossible cliff to make. The shot that justified every ounce of pain, every moment of suffering. The shot that would prevent attacks that could kill thousands of Americans. And it was impossible. 1,400 meters through hurricane-force winds, rain reducing visibility to near zero, a broken arm limiting her stability, an unfamiliar rifle with unknown quirks. Any one of these factors would make the shot nearly impossible for even the best snipers in the world. Rachel had all of them working against her. Raven status, Holt pressed. We need that shot now, he's moving back inside. Through the scope, Rachel watched the architect take a step toward the door. In seconds, he'd be gone, disappeared into the building where Holt's team would have to clear room by room, where he might escape through hidden tunnels, where he might vanish again for another 8 years. Rachel closed her eyes for 1 second, blocking out everything: the pain, the wind, the rain, the impossible distance. In that moment, she thought of her grandfather, the man who'd given her the compass she still carried. A Marine sniper in Vietnam, he'd once told her, "The shot you can't make is the shot you don't take." She opened her eyes. The world crystallized with perfect clarity. She could see the wind's pattern in the rain, could read its rhythm. She understood the rifle now, felt its tendencies. Her broken arm no longer mattered. The improvised rest held steady. Rachel waited, breathing slowed. Heartbeat dropped to 40 beats per minute. The architect paused at the doorway, turning to say something to a subordinate. 3 seconds of stillness. 3 seconds where every variable aligned. Rachel squeezed the trigger. The bullet flew through the storm, through rain and wind, across 1,400 meters of impossible space. Time seemed to slow as Rachel watched through her scope, unable to see the round itself, but tracking its theoretical path based on pure instinct. The architect's head snapped back. His body crumpled to the balcony floor. "Target down," Rachel transmitted, her voice steady despite the trembling in her limbs. "The architect is down. Confirm kill." Compound descended into chaos. Through her scope, Rachel watched fighters scatter in panic, their leader dead, their defensive positions compromised. Alpha platoon pressed their advantage, clearing rooms with ruthless efficiency. But Rachel's job wasn't finished. She had 4 rounds left, and her team was still in danger. A fighter appeared on a rooftop, trying to flank Morrison's element. Rachel's shot dropped him before he could fire. 3 rounds remaining. 2 more hostiles tried to escape through a rear gate. Rachel eliminated both with consecutive shots. 1 round left. "All elements compound is secure," Holt transmitted. "I'm on the balcony, confirming kill on primary target. The architect is dead. I repeat, primary target is eliminated." Rachel slumped against her rifle, exhaustion washing over her like a physical wave. She'd done it. Against every impossible odd, she'd made the shot that mattered. "Raven, this is Alpha 1, Holt's voice came through, filled with emotion she'd never heard from the stoic commander. "That shot, that was the most incredible piece of marksmanship I've ever witnessed. You just prevented attacks that could have killed thousands. Do you understand that? Thousands of Americans are alive today because of what you did." "Just doing my job, sir," Rachel replied, though her voice cracked slightly. "Alpha 7, this is Alpha 2, Morrison's voice joined. "We're securing intelligence materials now. Computers, phones, documents, the whole network is here. This is a gold mine." Webb's transmission was more personal. "Raven, I've been your spotter for 3 years, and I've never seen anything like that. 1,400 meters through a hurricane with a broken arm and a rifle you'd never fired. They're going to be talking about this shot for the next 50 years. But the celebration was premature. Rachel heard Morrison's voice again, urgent this time. "Contact. We've got a runner. Target is mobile, heading for the northeast exit. He's got a laptop case. Could be the architect's second in command with critical intel." Through her scope, Rachel saw him. A man in tactical gear sprinting across the compound. heading for a gate that would lead to escape routes in the mountains. If he got away with that laptop, pieces of the architect's network might survive. "I've got him," Rachel transmitted, tracking the running figure. "But he's moving fast and this is my last round." The target was at 1,200 meters now, running at full speed. Rachel would have to lead him, calculate his speed and direction, factor in the continuing wind and rain. With her last bullet, no second chances. "Take the shot if you have it," Holt authorized, "but don't risk it if—" Rachel fired. The runner fell mid-stride, tumbling across the muddy ground, the laptop case skittering away from his lifeless hands. "Target down," Rachel reported simply. "Magazine empty. I'm Winchester on ammunition." The radio was silent for a moment, then Webb's odd voice. "8 shots, 8 kills. Raven, you just went 8 for 8 in conditions that would make most snipers pack it in. That's unreal." "Alpha elements begin exfiltration procedures," Holt ordered. "Morrison, secure that laptop. Webb, take a team and get to the southern ridge. Our sniper needs extraction and medical attention." The exfiltration was a blur. Rachel barely remembered Webb and 2 other SEALs reaching her position, their expressions mixing disbelief at her survival with concern at her condition. Webb took one look at her swollen arm, the blood-soaked bandages, the sheer exhaustion in her eyes, and immediately called for a stretcher. "I can walk," Rachel protested weakly. "Sure you can," Webb replied gently, already signaling the others. "But you don't have to, not anymore." They carried her down the mountain as the storm intensified, fighting their way to the extraction point. The helicopter insertion was harrowing, wind buffeting the bird, visibility near zero. But the Night Stalker pilots earned their reputation, getting them all out alive. Rachel's last clear memory before losing consciousness was Holt kneeling beside her stretcher in the helicopter, his hand on her shoulder. "You did good, Lieutenant Commander," he said, and this time there was no skepticism, no doubt, only profound respect. "Better than good. You just became a legend." Rachel woke 3 days later in Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. The doctors told her she'd been severely hypothermic, dehydrated, suffering from blood loss and exhaustion. Her left arm required surgery, pins and plates to repair the complex fracture. They said her sniper career was probably over. She refused to accept that verdict. 6 months of rehabilitation followed. Physical therapy that was more painful than anything she'd experienced in Bud's days when she couldn't hold a coffee cup without trembling, let alone a rifle. Nights when doubt crept in, whispering that maybe the doctors were right. But Rachel had climbed an impossible cliff with a broken arm. She'd made an impossible shot through an impossible storm. She wasn't about to let something as simple as a healing bone stop her. During her recovery, news of the mission spread through the special operations community. The official story was classified. The public would never know the details of Operation Phantom Thunder. But within SEAL teams, Army Special Forces, Marine Raiders, and Air Force Special Tactics, the story circulated in hushed tones. The female SEAL sniper who'd been declared dead, who'd climbed a vertical cliff face one-handed, who'd made a 1,400-meter shot through hurricane winds with a broken arm and an unfamiliar rifle, who'd eliminated the architect and saved thousands of lives. The legend of Raven grew with each retelling. The intelligence recovered from the compound led to the dismantling of terrorist cells in 7 countries. The laptop Rachel's final bullet had secured contained complete details of the planned domestic attacks, shopping malls in Dallas and Minneapolis, subway systems in New York and Washington, schools in suburban California, all prevented before they could begin. The official estimate, Rachel's actions, directly and indirectly, had saved more than 2,000 lives. When Rachel returned to active duty 8 months later, her arm fully healed, her skills sharper than ever, she received orders to Naval Special Warfare Command Headquarters. She walked into the conference room expecting a routine briefing and found instead Commander Holt, Captain Reeves, and a two-star admiral she recognized from photographs, the commander of Naval Special Warfare. "Lieutenant Commander Torres," the admiral began, "please be seated." He slid a folder across the table. Inside was a promotion to full commander and orders establishing a new program, the first fully co-ed SEAL sniper training course. "We need someone to run it," the admiral said. "Someone who can prove beyond any doubt that the only things that matter in this community are skill, dedication, and the will to complete the mission regardless of circumstances. I can't think of anyone more qualified than the woman who rose from a storm that should have killed her and made a shot that shouldn't have been possible." Rachel looked at Holt, who nodded with a slight smile. "It was my recommendation, Commander. You've already proven yourself 100 times over. Now it's time to build the next generation." 3 months later, Rachel stood in front of her first class of SEAL sniper candidates, 22 students, including 4 women. They watched her with a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and determination. "My name is Commander Rachel Torres," she began, her voice carrying across the room. "Some of you may have heard stories about me. Some of those stories are even true." A few nervous chuckles. "But I'm not here to tell you war stories. I'm here to teach you that excellence in this community has no gender. It has no easy days. It requires every ounce of skill, dedication, and heart you possess." She paused, letting her eyes move across each face. 8 months ago, I was separated from my team, injured, alone in hostile territory. Every rational reason said I should hide and survive, but the mission required more. So I climbed an impossible cliff, took an impossible shot, and completed an impossible mission. Not because I'm special, not because I'm the first woman to earn this position, but because when everything went wrong, I did what SEALs do. I adapted, I improvised, and I completed the mission. Rachel's voice grew stronger, filled with the conviction earned through pain and triumph. "That's the only standard that matters in this community. Not whether you're male or female, not your background or where you came from. The only question is, when everything goes wrong, when you're broken and bleeding and the mission seems impossible, will you find a way to complete it anyway?" She looked at the women in the class specifically. "Some of you will face doubters. Some will question whether you belong here. Prove them wrong the same way I did. One shot at a time, one mission at a time, one impossible moment after another." In the back of the room, Commander Holt stood observing, arms crossed. When Rachel glanced his way, he gave her a single nod of respect, the kind given between equals, between warriors who'd bled together. Rachel turned back to her class. "Now let's get to work. We've got snipers to build." As the students filed out to the range, Webb approached, now promoted to Master Chief. "Think they're ready for what you're going to put them through?" Rachel smiled, remembering the storm, the cliff, the shot that changed everything. "Nobody's ever ready, Chief. But that's how legends are made, in the moments when ready doesn't matter anymore, and all that's left is the will to succeed." She walked toward the range, her arm fully healed, her purpose clear. The ghost who rose from the storm had become something more, a standard, an inspiration, proof that courage and skill knew no boundaries. Behind her, Master Chief Webb grinned. "Hooyah, Commander." Rachel's response carried on the wind. "Hooyah." The end.